Hey everybody, so in today's video we're going to create a weather app that fetches data from an API. You can look up any city and get the weather. If that sounds good to you, then sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. If you would like to follow along, you will need your own API key. The API that we'll be using is openweathermap.org. You do need to sign up for an account though, it is free. To sign up for an account, you can go to sign in. If you're currently not registered, you can create an account for free. Once you're signed in, you'll need an API key. Go to My API Keys. It may take you some time to get an API key generated for you. Mine took about 15 minutes. And once you get it, make sure it's active. We will need that API key about 20 minutes into this topic. Hopefully for you by then, it'll be generated. Okay, let's do this everybody. We will begin by creating a form element. The form element will have a class of weather form. Our form element is going to have an input element and a button. Within this input element, we'll type in the name of the city we would like to retrieve the weather data for. So the type of this input element is going to be text, for some text. The class will be city input, so a user can type in the city. And we'll add a placeholder. Let me zoom in a little so you can see it. The placeholder will equal enter city. Then we'll need a button. Let's create a button element with text of get weather. The type of this button will be submit. It's the submit button for our form. After retrieving the weather data, we'll display the weather data in a card format, like a Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh card. So we will create a div element with a class of card. But before applying some CSS, we should at least add some placeholder elements so we can style them and see the changes. For the time being, let's create an h1 element. We will be deleting these elements later, so don't get too attached. I will set the class of this element to be city display. We'll add a sample city. Let's say Miami, or pick a city of your choosing. Then I will create a paragraph element. The class will be temp display, meaning temperature. Let's say the temperature is 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or pick something in Celsius. If you're on Windows, to add a degree symbol, you can hold Alt, then type 0176. Miami is going to be 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Then we'll create a paragraph element for the humidity. Class equals humidity display. For the text, let's say humidity, colon space, then a percentage, 75%. Then we need a description of the weather. This will be another paragraph element. The class will equal description display, desk meaning description. For the description, let's say clear skies. I'll also display an emoji, depending on what the weather is. The class will be weatherEmoji. I'll use a sun. For some reason, if we can't display the weather data, such as if we can't locate a city, let's add the following paragraph. The class of this element will be error display. We'll add the text of, please enter a city. That is all the HTML that we need for now. We're going to apply some CSS styling next. So now let's head to our CSS style sheet. We are going to select the body of our document. Select a font family. I will pick Arial with a backup of sans serif. I'll change the background color of the body. Background color, pick a color. I'm going to use HSL values. I will set the lightness to be 95%. So it's a light gray color. I will set all margin around the body to be 0. Then I'll use Flexbox to display the elements. Display flex. The flex direction will be a column to arrange all the elements in a column. Then align item center to horizontally align all the elements. Align item center. Now we'll select the class of weather form. That'll be this form that has an input element and a button. All we'll do is add a little bit of margin around the entire form, 20 pixels. Then we'll select our city input. That's going to be the text box. Class of city input. I will add some padding of 10 pixels. Let me zoom out to 100%. Increase the font size to 2 rem. Set the font weight to be bold. I'll add a border, 2 pixel solid, and pick a color. But I'll lower the alpha, so it's transparent, to 30%. There's our border currently. Border radius around the corners. Let's do 10 pixels. Add some margin of 10 pixels. That'll separate this element from the button. And set a width of 300 pixels. Okay, let's style the button next. Okay, we are going to select all buttons that have an attribute where the type equals submit. So that's going to be for our submit button that says get weather. Let me scroll down. Okay, I'm going to add some padding around the button. 10 pixels by 20 pixels. I'll set the font weight to be bold. I'll increase the font size to be 2 rem. Pick a background color for the button. I'll pick something green. But I'll use HSL values. I've already pre-picked a color. Let's go with 122, 39%, and 50%. That's a good shade of green. I will set the color to be white for the font color. Remove the border, border none. And border radius 5 pixels to round the corners. Then when we hover our cursor over the button, I would like it to be a pointer. And that does work. When we hover our cursor over the button, we'll use the hover pseudo class to change the background color. So let's take our button where the type attribute is submit, access the hover pseudo class, take our background color, make it a little bit darker. I'll bring down the lightness by 10%, so it's at 40%. So that does in fact work. Okay, then we're going to select our card class that contains all the weather data. So we will select the class of card. For the background, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to use a linear gradient. Instead of selecting the background color, we will select the background. I will use the linear gradient function. There's 3 arguments. Think of a linear gradient as a slow transition between 2 colors. We need an angle in degrees. We'll say 180 degrees for now. Then a color. Let's pick something blue and orange. I'm going to pick some colors that look a little bit better. So for blue, let's set the hue to be 210, 100% for the saturation, and the lightness will be 75%. That's a good shade of blue. And for orange, we'll use another HSL value. For the hue, I'll say 40%. The saturation will be 100%. And the lightness will be 75%. So I'm hoping with this linear gradient, the background color looks kind of like a sunrise or a sunset. Once we have our background, I will add some padding of 50 pixels. I'll add a box shadow to this card. We'll add a vertical and horizontal offset of 2 pixels each, and a blur effect where the radius is 5 pixels. Then we'll pick a color. I'm just going to lower the alpha to 50%. Not bad. This gives our card a 3D pop effect. I will set a minimum width of this card to be 300 pixels. Then we have to align everything within it. I'll use Flexbox because I like Flexbox. Display flex. Flex direction will be a column. And align items center to horizontally align the items. There we go. Then we'll select all H1 elements. That's going to be our city name. Select all H1 elements. Increase the font size to be 3.5 rem. I'll remove any margin from the top. Margin top will be 0. And add margin to the bottom of 25 pixels. Then we'll select all paragraphs. That's going to be everything underneath our city. Select all paragraphs. Increase the font size to 1.5 rem. There's a lot of natural margin between the paragraphs. Let's set all margin to be 0 to see what it looks like. Okay, let's add a little bit of margin. 5 pixels on the top and bottom, 0 margin on the sides. That's a lot better. We'll select the city display and the temperature display. We're going to be selecting 2 classes. City display, comma, our temp display. Take these 2 classes, apply the following properties. You know what, for our font size, let's set that to be 3.5 rem. We can honestly remove that from H1. For the font weight, I will set that to be bold. For the color, I'll make the color a little transparent. I'll set the alpha down to 75%. So that our city and our temperature, they're both going to be transparent. Then I'll add some margin to the bottom. Margin bottom, 25 pixels. Okay, let's select our humidity display. Class, humidity, display. Set the font weight to be bold and add some margin to the bottom of 25 pixels. Then we'll select our description display, which we shortened to desk display. For the font style, I will set it to be italic, and the font weight will be bold. I'll increase the font size to 2 rem. Then we'll select our weather emoji. So class weather emoji. Remove all margin around the emoji, margin 0. Then we'll increase the font size of the emoji. The size will be 7.5 rem. So it's kind of big. Then if for some reason we display an error, we'll display this text. So this class is error display. I'll set the font size to be 2.5 rem. The font weight will be bold. I'll set the color to be something transparent. I'll lower the alpha to 75%. Okay, that is all the CSS that we need. Let's go back to our HTML file. We can delete everything within the card class. We just wanted to see what it would look like with the elements populated. With our card element, I will set the style attribute to be, take the display property, set it to be none. We don't want to display the card at all until we get the weather data, until it's returned to us. Our HTML is done, our CSS is done, then we're ready to add some JavaScript functionality. We'll declare our constants that we need. Const weather form equals document dot. Now, since we're not working with IDs, we can't get element by ID. We're working with classes. We can use query selector or query selector all. So I'm going to use query selector. This will return the first element in this class. We only have one element with this class. Class weather form. We'll store a reference to it. Const city input equals document dot query selector. We are selecting the class of city input. That's going to be this text box. Const card. Our card is what contains all the weather data. document.querySelector, select the class of card, and give me the first element. Now we'll need that API key. Const API key equals. Now here's my API key. Please don't try and use this one specifically. I will be deactivating it at the end of this video. Hopefully by now you should have that API key given to you. First, we'll take our weather form. We'll add an event listener. This is our form, the text element and the submit button. When we click on this button, the event type is going to be submit. After we attempt to submit this form, we'll do the following code. We'll have one parameter, an event, that's going to be provided to us. Arrow, do this. We'll fill this in later. We'll declare our functions that we need. We will need an async function to get weather data. There will be one parameter, a city, that's going to be passed in. Then we'll need a function to display weather info. There will be one parameter, data. The data will be in a JSON-like format. We'll create a function to get weather emoji based on what the weather is. There will be one parameter, a weather ID. Then we'll create a function to display to the screen any errors, if there are any. Function display error. There will be one parameter, a message to be displayed to the window. Within our event listener, once we have a submit event, once we click the button, forms do have a default behavior where they'll refresh the page. We would like to prevent that. So let's take our event, use the prevent default method to prevent the default behavior for a form. We don't want to refresh the page. Then we'll have to get the city, the value within this text box. Const city equals, take the city input, access the value, store it within this variable. It should be a string. We'll use an if statement. If city. If there's a value within here, this will be true. We can use it within an if statement. If there is a city, do this. Else, we'll call the displayError function. Else, we will display an error. We will pass along the message to please enter a city. Let's fill in the displayError function. We want to be sure that it works before continuing. The displayError function is at the bottom. We'll be provided with a message to display. We will create a constant of error display equals document. Now we'll create an element. Create element. We will create a paragraph. Then we'll need to change the text content of this element. Error display, access the text content, set it equal to be our message. Then we're going to add the class of error display. We would like these CSS properties. Take our error display element, access the class list, then we will add a class. We will add the CSS class of error display. Then we will take our card element, which normally displays the weather data, take our card, reset the text content if there is something there. We'll set it to be an empty string. So normally with our card, the display is set to none. We'll set the display to be a block, or even flex. Access our card, access the style, access the display, and I will set the display to be flex to display it. We will take our card, we will append a child element. Append child. We will append this paragraph of error display to the card. Now, if I were to not type in anything and just press get weather, we get this error message. Please enter a city. To our card, I'm just going to round the corners to make it look better. Border radius, let's do 10 pixels. That's better. Okay, moving on. If we do have a city, if there's text within here, we will try some code because it might cause some errors. We will catch any errors that happen. We have one parameter of error. If there's an error, we can console.log or console.error the error. Then let's call our displayError function. We'll pass along the error and display it. Now we need to get the weather data. Within our try block, we will create a constant of weather data equals. Now we need to await getWeatherData function and pass in our city. So with await, we can only use await within an async function. Since we're within an arrow function, we could declare this arrow function as an async function. So let's precede our event parameter with async so that we can use await. We're going to wait for this function to return the weather data. Once we receive our weather data, we will call the displayWeatherInfo function and pass along that data, the weather data. Okay, this function is complete. Once you've typed everything in, I'm going to close this function. And we can close our displayError function too. Now, once we want to get our weather data after we have a city, now we actually need to fetch the weather data. We'll have to create a URL. We'll create a constant of API URL. This is what we'll pass to the fetch function. We will use a template string. Be sure to use a pair of backticks. We'll need to get the following URL. At this web page, we need to find the API call where we can pass in a city name. We can copy this within our template string. We'll paste it. We'll replace the city name with the placeholder and use our city variable. For the API key, we'll use a placeholder. Pass in the API key. This is what we'll pass to the fetch function. We will create a response, const response, equals await. We can use await because we're within an async function. We will fetch our API URL. Once we have a response, let's check our response. Let's console.log our response just to see what it is. Okay, I will type in the city of Miami, get weather. Our data should be within console.log. Here's our response. It has a status of 200, and it's okay. We need to check to see if our response is not okay. What if we couldn't retrieve the data? I'll make up some gibberish city. Let's go to inspect, console. We have a response. Status 404. The response is not okay. We'll write an if statement. If our response is not okay, we will throw a new error and pass along this message. Could not fetch weather data. Else, if our response is okay, we will return the response. And we will await our response, convert it to a JSON format using the JSON method. So at the end of this function, return an object that's in a JSON-like format. This data is going to be returned to our event listener. After we get our weather data, we need to display it. We'll work on the displayWeatherInfo function next. This one. Let's console.log the data we receive. I will type in Miami. So it looks like that worked. We have a name of Miami for the city. We have the weather, which is an array. It's an array of objects. We have coordinates, clouds, pretty much anything you can think of regarding the weather. Let's get the name. Within main, there is temperature. The temperature will be in Kelvin. We need to convert it. I'll get the humidity. Within weather, it's an array of objects. We will get the description. Overcast clouds. and this ID. Eventually, we'll use the ID to return an emoji. There's different weather codes. I'll explain that later. So we're going to use some object destructuring. Const, use object destructuring with a set of curly brackets. We will access the name property and create a variable of city. City will be Miami in this case. Then we will access main. Main is a property that contains an array. Take main, use object destructuring again. Now we're within a nested object. I would like the temp and the humidity. Then let's select our weather. So weather, it's an array of objects. We'll have to use array destructuring followed by object destructuring. Give me the description and the ID. We have to set this all equal to data to use destructuring. And let me organize this to make it look nice. Our data is one gigantic object that has nested objects and nested arrays. So after destructuring, we'll have these variables: the city, the temperature, the humidity, a description of the weather, and an ID for the weather code. Now we can use these like variables. So with our card, currently we're not displaying it. Now I would like to display it. We are going to take our card, set the text content to be an empty string. If there's already some text here, we would like to reset it, such as if there was an error message. Take our card, access its style, set the display property to be flex for flexbox. Just to be sure that this is working, I'm going to get the weather without entering a city. After we do type in a city, it should reset. That's good. That's what we wanted. Or if we make up some gibberish, we have that error, could not fetch weather data. But then if we type in something legitimate and get the weather, it'll reset. That's what we would like. Okay, now we have to create the elements. The elements that we previously deleted from the div element. We need to recreate those. We will create a constant for city display to display the city. Document.create element. Our city display was an h1 element. Let's copy this line of code and paste it a few times. 4 additional times. We have city display, temp display for the temperature. That was a paragraph element. Humidity display. Humidity display. That was also a paragraph element. A description display, which we shortened to desk display. That was also a paragraph. And a weather emoji. Weather emoji. And that was also a paragraph. Okay, now we need to change the text content of each of these elements, but they're empty, so to say. Let's take the text content of our city display dot text content property equals our city variable that we destructured. Okay, let's see if that works. I'll type in a city, get weather. Oh, and then we need to append it. Take our card, append child. We will append the city display element. Let's try that again. Type in Miami, get the weather. That should display Miami. Let's try Dallas, Texas. Dallas. Oh, and before displaying it, we need to add the class list, the CSS class for the city display. After adding the text content, we will take our city display, access its class list, add the class, the CSS class of city display. So then, when we type in a city, we should have that CSS styling. All right, now we have to add the temperature, following the same format. We will take our temp display, access the text content equals, I'll use a template string with a pair of backticks. I'll add a placeholder, pass in our temperature, add a degree symbol. You can hold Alt, then type 0176 for a degree symbol. Now this is normally in Kelvin. Actually, I don't think Kelvin uses the degree symbol, but we'll be changing that momentarily. take our temperature display, access its class list, add the following class. Add the CSS class of temp display. Then we have to append the element to the card element. Take our card, we will append a child element of temperature display. So now we should see the temperature, but it's going to be in Kelvin. We have the city and the temperature. For the temperature, if you would like Celsius, let's use degrees Celsius. You have to subtract from the temperature 273.15. Okay, but now we should probably round it. So let's enclose this equation within a set of parentheses. Follow this with the to fixed method of numbers to round it to 1 decimal place. 15.6 degrees Celsius. If you would like a Fahrenheit temperature, this is the formula. Take our temp in Kelvin minus 273.15. We will multiply this by 9 divided by 5, plus 32. So let's enclose this all within a set of parentheses. So now we should get that temperature, but in Fahrenheit. Oh, and then add F to the end. 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Then we'll get the humidity. So take our humidity display element that we created, access the text, content, set it equal to be a template string using a pair of backticks. Let's add the word humidity, colon space, add a placeholder, display our humidity variable. We'll add the class list of humidity display, access its class list, add the following class of humidity display. Then we have to append the element to the card element. Card.append child, append our humidity display. So we should get the humidity. Miami, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 81. Let's add percent. 81%. Yep, that does work. Then we'll add the description. A description of the weather. Take the element of description display, access the text, content, equals the description. Then add the CSS class to the class list for this element. Description display, access the class list, add the following class of description display. Then add the element. Card.append child, we will append our description display. Let's type in Miami, get the weather. Currently in Miami, there's overcast clouds. Now we have to get an emoji based on the weather. With our element of weatherEmoji, we will access the text content equals, we will call the getWeatherEmoji function, but we have to pass in a weather ID. So we will pass in the ID variable that we receive from data. Once we get our weather emoji, we'll work on that momentarily. We'll take our element of weatherEmoji, access the class list, add the following CSS class of weatherEmoji. Then append it to the card. Card.append child, we will append our weatherEmoji. All right, now before we can test it, we need to fill in the getWeatherEmoji function. So with this Open Weather AI, there are different group codes. So our weather ID is going to be either within the 200 range, meaning a thunderstorm, the 300 range means drizzle, 500 is rain, 600 is snow, 700 is atmosphere, such as mist, smoke, or even a tornado. 800 exactly is a clear sky. Anything greater than 800 means clouds. So our weather ID is going to be one of these codes. So we're going to use a switch. We will examine the Boolean value of true. Does the value of true match one of these cases? we'll have a case for group 200. If our weather ID that we pass in is greater than or equal to 200, and the weather ID is less than 300. That means there's a thunderstorm. We will return an emoji, a thunderstorm emoji. Thunderstorm. I don't like the look of that one. That's better. Okay, group 300 is a drizzle. So let's copy this case because I don't feel like retyping it. If our weather ID is greater than or equal to 300 and less than 400, that means we have a drizzle. We'll just add an emoji of a raining cloud. So group 500 is also rain, but it's a heavier rain. So let's copy this case, paste it. If our weather ID is greater than or equal to 500 and less than 600, we'll return rain as well. Group 600 is snow. If our weather ID is greater than or equal to 600 and less than 700, we will return a snowflake, meaning snow. Then we have group 700. If our weather ID is greater than or equal to 700 and less than 800, we'll return some fog emoji. 800 exactly means a clear sky. We can display the sun. If our weather ID is strictly equal to 800 exactly, we'll return a sun emoji. Anything within the 800 range means clouds. So if our weather ID is greater than or equal to 801, 800 means clear sky. So with this group code, it only goes up to 809. If our weather ID is less than 810, return a cloud. Then let's add a default in case we get a weird weather code. Default, return, I don't know, a question mark. We get some unknown weather phenomena. UFOs or something, I don't know. Okay, and I think that should be everything. Let's close out of this, close out of these functions. And now if I were to type in Miami and get the weather, in Miami it is 60.3 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 81%. There's overcast clouds, and we get a cloud emoji because it's cloudy. Let's try Dallas. We have a clear sky, 45 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 63%, clear sky, and we get a sun emoji. All right, everybody, so that is a weather app that you can make using JavaScript, HTML, and CSS.